Most people think a billion-dollar business is built with a brilliant idea, something unique, something revolutionary, something nobody has ever seen before. That's the lie. Because if you actually study companies worth $1 billion or more, you start noticing something uncomfortable. They're not built on ideas. They're built on execution that most people are unwilling to repeat for years, sometimes decades, without applause, without certainty, and often without immediate reward. And if you're watching this thinking, maybe I could build something like that one day, then I need you to stay with me. Because what you're about to hear is not motivational fluff. It's the uncomfortable truth about what it really takes. And before we go any further, here's the deal. Most people who start watching this kind of content don't finish it. Not because it's boring, but because it slowly starts exposing the gap between what they dream about and what they're actually doing right now. So if you're serious, if you actually want to understand what separates a billion-dollar builder from everyone else, don't just watch this passively. Pay attention to what makes you uncomfortable, because that's usually where the truth is hiding. Now let's start with something most people never want to hear. A billion-dollar business is not built by someone who is trying to build a billion-dollar business. It is built by someone who is obsessed with solving a problem so deeply, so consistently, and so aggressively that the money becomes a byproduct of the solution. Let that sit for a second, because the moment you start chasing the billion, you start optimizing for attention, shortcuts, and validation. But the people who actually get there, they're obsessed with distribution, systems, retention, leverage, and compounding. Not hype, not trends, systems. Now here's the first reality check. Most billion-dollar companies take longer than people expect. Way longer. You see the headline when they hit valuation milestones, but you don't see the 7 to 15 years of iteration, failure, restructuring, near bankruptcy, ignored pitches, broken products, and nights where the founder is questioning everything. And this is where most people quit mentally, because they assume speed is the indicator of success. But in reality, durability is. A billion-dollar business is rarely a sprint. It is a pressure test that most ideas and most people fail under. So what actually creates that kind of scale? It starts with something simple but brutal. You need a problem worth billions. Not a nice-to-have problem. Not a this-would-be-cool problem. A painful, expensive, recurring problem that exists for a large group of people or businesses. If the problem is small, your ceiling is small. If the problem is rare, your market is capped. If the problem is emotional but not monetizable, you'll get attention but no empire. And here's where people mess up early. They fall in love with ideas instead of problems. But billion-dollar builders fall in love with friction. Where is life annoying? Where is money leaking? Where are systems broken? Where are humans wasting time, effort, or resources at scale? That's where the game begins. Now, once you find a real problem, the next trap appears immediately. Most people try to solve it perfectly, but billion-dollar companies are rarely perfect at the beginning. They are just good enough to start. The early version is usually ugly, incomplete, and even embarrassing in hindsight. But it does one thing well. It enters the market fast enough to start learning. Because the second truth is this. You do not build a billion-dollar business in isolation. You build it through feedback loops. Every interaction with a customer is data. Every complaint is direction. Every drop-off is insight. Every refund is information. And most people ignore that stage because they're too focused on making something impressive instead of making something alive. Now let's talk about something that actually separates billion-dollar businesses from everyone else. Distribution. You can have a great product and still stay broke, but you cannot have great distribution and stay small forever. Distribution is how your product reaches people consistently without you manually pushing it every time. This is where things like platforms, algorithms, partnerships, communities, and systems come in. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people focus 90% of their energy on the product and 10% on distribution. But billion-dollar builders often do the opposite because they understand something simple. A good product in the wrong place dies. A mediocre product with world-class distribution wins. Now, don't misunderstand this. Quality still matters, but timing and reach often matter more in the early stages. And this is where leverage comes in. Leverage is how you scale without scaling effort at the same rate. That means systems, automation, capital, media, software, and people. Let's break that down. If you're doing everything manually, you are capped. If your growth depends on your personal time, you are capped. If your revenue stops when you stop working, you are not building a business. You are building a job with complexity. Billion-dollar businesses remove that ceiling. They build systems that work while the founder sleeps, travels, or disappears. Now, here's where it gets even more important. A billion-dollar business does not grow linearly. It compounds. And most people don't understand compounding because they expect visible progress every day. But compounding looks like nothing is happening until suddenly everything is happening at once. Years of small improvements stack quietly. A better product here, a better onboarding there, a slightly improved conversion rate, a new distribution channel, a partnership that brings in steady users. None of it feels dramatic in the moment, but together it creates exponential outcomes. Now let's talk about something nobody likes hearing. Most ideas fail not because they are bad, but because the founder cannot survive the psychological weight of the process. Building something at scale is emotionally expensive. You will be ignored. You will be doubted. You will launch things that fail publicly. You will lose money. You will question your intelligence, and sometimes you will be surrounded by people who think you should stop. And the difference between someone who reaches scale and someone who doesn't is not always intelligence. It is endurance under uncertainty. Now here's a moment that changes how you think about billion-dollar businesses. At scale, the business is no longer about the founder's effort. It becomes about coordination. Thousands of moving parts. Marketing systems, engineering systems, sales systems, customer support systems, data systems, financial systems, all operating at once. And the founder's job slowly shifts from doing to designing, from execution to architecture, from working in the business to working on the system that works on the business. But to get there, you need something else most people underestimate: time. Not just time in years, but time under pressure, because every cycle of failure teaches something that cannot be learned from theory. And this is where many people miscalculate. They think they can compress experience through information, but information is not transformation. You can know everything about building a billion-dollar company and still not be able to build one, because knowing is not the same as surviving the process. Now let's talk about scale triggers. These are the moments where a business shifts from small to massive. One of the biggest triggers is product market fit. This is when your product is no longer something you are pushing. It becomes something people are pulling toward themselves. You stop convincing and start managing demand. Another trigger is distribution leverage. This is when one channel starts feeding growth repeatedly without constant reinvention. Another is brand trust, when people believe in your company before they even experience it. And another is network effects, when every new user makes the product more valuable for other users. These are not accidents. They are engineered. But here's the truth most people miss. You don't build these things all at once. You layer them, one at a time, slowly, and often painfully. Now let's talk about money, because everyone thinks that's the goal. Money is not the goal of a billion-dollar business. It is the measurement of scale. It reflects how much value you are creating and how efficiently you are distributing it. But if money is your primary focus, you will make decisions that optimize for short-term gain instead of long-term dominance. And that kills most potential billion-dollar ideas early because the early stage is not profitable. It is investment-heavy, time-heavy, emotion-heavy, and uncertainty-heavy. Now, here's something else that matters more than people realize. Speed of iteration. The faster you learn, the faster you adapt. And the faster you adapt, the faster you dominate. Companies that win are not always the smartest. They are often the fastest learners. They test more, they fail more, they adjust more, and they do it without ego, because ego slows iteration. If you need to be right all the time, you will not move fast enough. Now let's talk about talent. At some point, building a billion-dollar business stops being a solo game. You need people who are better than you in specific domains, not because you are weak, but because scale demands specialization. And the hardest part is not hiring people. It is trusting them with real responsibility. Most founders struggle here. They hold on too tightly. They become bottlenecks. But companies that scale learn to distribute authority. And that requires something uncomfortable. Letting go of control. Now, here's another truth. A billion-dollar business is not built in a straight line. It is built through cycles. Experimentation, expansion, correction, consolidation, and repeat. Some years are explosive. Some years feel stagnant. But underneath it all, the system is either improving or decaying. There is no neutral. Now, let's talk about risk. Every stage of growth has a different type of risk. Early stage risk is survival. Mid-stage risk is competition. Late stage risk is complexity. And most people only think about early risk. But the real challenge is managing complexity at scale without collapsing under it. Because systems that are not designed well eventually break under their own weight. Now, here's something that sounds simple but changes everything. Focus is the ultimate multiplier, not ideas, not capital, not even talent. Focus. Because every time you split attention, you slow compounding. And billion-dollar outcomes require sustained focus on a narrow set of high-leverage actions. Most people fail here because they constantly pivot. They chase trends. They abandon systems before they mature. But billion-dollar builders stay in the game long enough for the system to mature. Now let's talk about one more uncomfortable truth. Most people don't actually want to build a billion-dollar business. They want the outcome of one: freedom, money, respect. But they are not willing to go through the actual process required because the process is repetitive, uncertain, and often lonely. There are no shortcuts that survive reality. There are only strategies that compound over time. And if you are still here, listening, it probably means something in you is not satisfied with average outcomes. But wanting more is not enough, because desire is common, endurance is rare. Now, before this continues further, here's something important. If this is making you rethink what building something big actually means, don't just walk away and forget it in a few hours. Most people consume ideas like entertainment, but the ones who change their trajectory treat ideas like instructions. And the difference between those two is everything, because one leads to curiosity, the other leads to execution. And execution repeated over time is what eventually creates outcomes that look impossible from the outside. Now here's the final truth most people don't expect. A billion-dollar business is not built when things are going well. It is built in the moments when nothing is working, but the system is still being refined anyway. When motivation is gone, but discipline remains. When results are unclear, but effort continues. When progress is invisible, but consistency does not stop. And over time, that consistency becomes compounding. And compounding becomes scale. and scale becomes something that years later people look at and call overnight success. But there is no overnight, only accumulation, only systems, only time, and only the people willing to stay in the game long enough for reality to bend in their favor.